Ants are creatures without much thought, and yet they are arguably one of the most successful species on the planet. So how is this possible if the queen isn't telling the workers what to do, and no single ant has instructions for running the colony? For this, we turn to expert Deborah Gordon, who has studied harvester ants in Arizona for the past 20 years.
Ants communicate through a network of internal contacts. They are covered in a grease made of hydrocarbons, and each type of worker has a different type of grease based on how much it is exposed to the outside of the colony. So, for example, a forager would have a different scent than a maintenance worker just because it is more exposed to the outside. The internal contacts keep track of the rate it meets a certain type of worker, and this determines if an ant goes in or out of the colony. If a maintenance worker meets a lot of foraging ants returning with food, it will stop what it's doing and become a forager.
She has also found that older colonies are larger compared to smaller ones, so you would think the system is a lot more unorganized in the larger colonies since there are so many more ants, but it's not.
In fact, their system of task allocation is a lot more variable in younger, smaller colonies. This is because the larger a colony is, the more internal contacts can be made, and so the stronger a scent can be. So, looking at an individual ant, there's a lot of randomness and variability, but zooming out to the entire colony, the system is very organized because of the additive effects of all the ants, even though there is no central control.
Sometimes it isn't enough to understand the way things work by simply looking at the individual parts. In the example of the ant colony, order comes out of disorder, and by stepping away from the individual, we find a different type of mystery amongst the group. And this is what we call the Science of Emergence.
Perhaps a far more familiar example displaying the mystery of emergence comes from our brain. Researchers and philosophers alike have tried to grapple with not only the question of what is consciousness, but also of how and where thought is stored and managed. To answer this, we must first look at a neuron, the functional unit of the brain. A neuron is made up of a soma, axon, and many dendrites. Its primary purpose is to send electrical and chemical signals to other neurons, essentially creating a neural network by which sensory organs communicate with the brain. Specialized sensory neurons are responsible for passing information from sensory organs, such as the eyes and ears. So, where exactly is thought stored? Thought is not stored in any one neuron. Rather, it is the interaction of hundreds of millions of neurons where thought is finally formed. Neurobiologists like Christoph Koch believe that consciousness is the emergent property of the simultaneous firing of all the neurons in our brain.
Let me put it to you in terms of something that we do every day. When we have a cup of coffee every morning, how do we know that that's actually what it is? Well, one part of our brain may recognize the smell, while the other looks at the shape or the size of the cup. It's that coincidence of firing that tells us that it's one thing. The neurons in our brain are essentially vibrating in harmony, and a cohesive thought emerges. A truly amazing spectacle. With advances in brain imaging technology like the functional MRI, neuroscientists are able to finally uncover what parts of the brain are activated by different stimuli. The brain is both anatomically and functionally partitioned into different areas called lobes. The parietal lobe is responsible for visuospatial processing, the occipital lobe is responsible for sight, the temporal lobe is responsible for smell and sound, and the frontal lobe is responsible for conscious thought. Together, these systems are integrated to comprehend our surroundings and understand the world around us. One area of neurobiology that is not yet fully understood, and may never well be, is what is it that brings something into attention and not the other? In other words, since our thoughts are fully integrated by all the different sensory inputs, there must be some entity within our brain that brings all the thoughts together. I guess you could say that there is something within you controlling these processes, but that would not solve the problem, it just pushes it back another step. You could then ask, who is controlling that system? And then who is controlling that system?
Emergent properties can be found in all levels of biological and even non-biological systems. For example, muscle contraction is an emergent property of the contractile fibers within a muscle cell, but it is not a property of each fiber.
Metabolic rate is an emergent property of digestion and respiration. Lastly, adhesion and cohesion are the emergent properties of the interaction of many water molecules.
To drive home a point, The science of emergence allows us to uncover complex properties of systems that could not be understood by studying its individual components.